Let's go, Brandon.
Good.
We live?
We're live.
Hey, good morning, Eatonton, Putnam County, and Georgia, United States, and the whole world. We find out that people are watching this all over at least all over the region. Joe, who's with us today, Joe DeLoach, will usually report back to tell me how many people have watched it from how far away. So we welcome you wherever you're from, near or far. I'm here. This is Crosstalk Podcast at Eatonton First United Methodist Church. And it is kind of crazy that this is what we do these days. But we realized during COVID, just to give a summation, that we realized when everyone was isolated that we probably needed to step up our ability to communicate beyond the walls in different ways. So we've jacked into the matrix, and we are having podcasts every week. And of course, they're recorded, and you can watch them on our webpage, EatontonFirstUMC.com. Or actually, Eatonton First United Methodist Church.com. Is that right? It's somewhere out there. Eatonton First United Methodist Church or EatontonFirstUMC.com. And then, of course, on YouTube, on our webpage, First United Methodist Church of Eatonton, and through Facebook. Most of you watch through Facebook. But I'm here today with Brandon. One of our guys, Brian Beveridge, has got, flu-like symptoms, cold, sinus, and we're all freaking out about COVID. So that said, we don't let employees come to work if they've got the sniffles. No, he actually is sick, and so he's watching right now. I'm sure he'll comment on my snarky comments. We miss you, Brian, but Brian's not here. Good news, Brandon is also very technologically savvy, and so Brandon is running everything over there in Brian's chair. Of course, Joe DeLoach, and we have a guest who has been on the calendar for us. He's actually my neighbor. He lives right across the street from me, and I've known him for a long time, but we won't go into that. Back when he was a working man and I was an undergrad at Georgia Tech, he didn't go to Georgia Tech, he went to Georgia. But Duncan Williams, who lives across the street, member here, grew up here, raised here, came back here. So we're going to talk today about family. We've been talking about it for the last, half hour. But the conversation started with Duncan and I were talking, and we brought Joe into it while Brandon was logging us in and getting us all into the matrix, so to speak. We started talking about the family in 2022. It's 2022. This is our first 2022 podcast. So in Putnam County specifically. So if you're from here, you'll appreciate this. But we his wife is a nurse at the public schools, and we in the church we feel the community's issues, but we are grieving, and the grievance that we have is the family dynamic in Putnam County. So I don't know if that's a good jump start to what's going on, but family dynamic, nuclear families, non-nuclear families, how are kids affected by these family dynamics? And of course, there's a larger issue in our society about family and what defines family, and ultimately churches and really faith in general, whether it's Christianity, Islam, whatever religion you're from, they tend to focus their energies on bringing families together and encouraging men and women to raise children, and I guess that goes all the way back to Abraham, the Abrahamic faith where God spoke to Abraham and Sarah, and really the family of God began to be multiplied fruitfully, right? So from a religious perspective, I guess more importantly from a perspective of Jesus, we're just thinking about the family situations that we observe in our community. I will give a full disclosure. I was adopted by my stepdad. So when I was in second grade, my stepdad, who had married my mother when I was in kindergarten, she actually before kindergarten, my dad adopted me, and so my stepdad, that is. So I come from a non-nuclear home. I have a younger sister who's a half sister technically, but it worked for us. But either way, I had a dad in the home, and I don't know if that gives us a good I guess what's the question I want to ask here? How do you perceive the family structure in 2022?
Well, I mean, to me, I just look at the trends, and we're seeing over time, really over the last 60 years in the United States, and certainly we see it in particularly in blue collar communities like Putnam County, and certainly we feel it, is sort of the breakdown of the family structure and what that means for society. And you see that it sort of correlates broadly nationally, when families aren't together, and I don't know which way the cause and effect runs, they tend to go to church less. Or when people go to church less, the family structure breaks down more, probably, if I had to guess. But that leads to all sorts of things that end up being bad outcomes for children. But my question is how does the church and how are we as Christians to engage with that big dynamic that's going on in the world, and really even more broadly, we sort of tend to lack in the electronic age. I think it's kind of exposed something that's part of human nature, that has been there for a while, but it's really been exposed and capitalized upon by the tech companies. I mean, the whole news business used to be paid for by subscriptions and advertising, and that's people don't do that anymore. That's not how we get our information. And they've realized that we're more likely to become engaged, we're more likely to share it, and to be engaged longer, which means more ad revenue, if we get news that makes us mad. So all the content creators, the traditional news sources and other news sources that are popping up, are sending us things that are making us mad, and we get mad at the other group, and then the other group gets mad at us. And I know that's kind of a veer off from the family question that you led up to, but I think I think that is an offshoot of this general trend where we're becoming enemies of each other. Mm-hmm. We're starting to see each other as enemies the more we engage electronically, and to what extent do we turn away from that? As Christians, should we turn away from that? And to what extent should we engage with it and bring the Christian message to that? A message of peace and a message of truth. And then how does that apply back to the family? Right. What message should we be bringing back to the family for that? So those are my questions, and I'm trying to struggle for my soul with this.
Mm.
Well, one thing I know is that Satan loves division. He loves making us feel alone, putting us in our own little bubble, and when the news is doing nothing but talking about the division and how America is divided and the world is divided. Right now in America, we have two completely different ideologies trying to run rampant. And I'm not saying one, I have my own personal views, I'm not saying one is more right than the other, but Satan is loving this right now. And a lot of this is because of the news and families being divided in poor communities. And it's just, Satan is loving this right now.
Is anybody watching the news anymore?
I
don't mean to sound that. I tried to keep up, but is anybody paying attention anymore?
I do every morning when I do my little
so
workout routine, but it's just the noise in the background. They usually run it like 15 minutes, then the weather, then they repeat it again. So by the time I'm through, I've heard everything 3 and 4 times.
Right.
And
Well, what you just said, watching the news, that doesn't exist anymore. But that's not how we get our information anymore.
that's right.
We do get, you're not uninformed, even though we don't watch the news, we're not uninformed about what's going on.
Right.
It's right there in front
It's
of you.
right there on Facebook when we're clicking things, every notification I get popping up on my cell phone. And how do I get those notifications? It's because I clicked on one that just is daggum outrageous to me. And then you know what? They send me more that are like that.
Once you're tied into it.
Once you're tied into that, and because that's their business model. I don't blame them. Craigslist destroyed the news business model. They got to make money this way because they got to get me to click on their content. But they capitalize. That's the human emotion that they figured out that is going to get us to engage with their material.
Right.
How do we fight that? How do we fight the messages that are being sent out to our families? How do we fight the anger that we have? How do we be aware of what it's doing to us personally?
I think the best thing we can do is sit down and talk with our family. Like actually discuss what is going on in the world. Not just discuss with our family, but reach out and talk to our community, talk to our neighbors. We don't talk to our neighbors anymore. And the camera's doing something weird. But we don't talk to our neighbors anymore. We don't really sit down and, I mean, Joe, we've come to dinners at your house. Back in Jersey, that doesn't happen. It's literally just your family. You sit around, you're playing on your phone, nobody's talking to each other. But when we come to dinners at your house, it's nobody's on their phone. Everybody's standing around, talking, communicating, having a good time. And that's definitely something that I think can help fix it. It's definitely not a cure-all, end-all kind of thing, but it could definitely help just communication, better communication within your own community.
My son listens to this when he can, and his last comment was, other than we're real people, was that he liked the fact that we're actually communicating. And Joseph claims that that is one thing that's lacking, and since he sells insurance and talks to a lot of people, that's lacking in the world today is where you sit down and talk, you share, and it's not that I'm trying to make you feel like me, I'm not trying to whatever, it's what, I'm just sharing what I believe. And I think the church needs to realize our family unit has changed. And my concern is not so much for the adults, it's for the next generation. Because let's face it, we are only here for a certain period of time. So what am I supposed to do while I'm here? I'm supposed to use what talents, gifts God has given me to pass on to the next generation. And are we doing that in the church? Why not? I worry so much that we have parents that don't see religion and faith in God as being important.
I think a relationship. I think that we. When you speak of family, the question goes back to family, the family unit, and I think iterations that sort of expand off of that are family unit, communities of faith. In our case, the church. Communities, conglomerate, like connections of churches, and in our community, just in general, our school systems for sure, our the places that we do business together, and I think I will dare I say we are living in a sick society. I don't think our society's been. There have been times I think when our society has been healthier. I think society has seen moments of sickness that are probably similar to this. This happens to be the one we're living in.
That's right.
But I think in all of this, a pastor that I did an internship out in Tacoma, Washington, with a guy named John Graciano, and it was a church for the disenfranchised. Back then it was called The Crossing. I think they've changed the name, but it's still out there. And he said his first sort of thesis was that people live life with a love deficit, and how they fill that deficit happens in different ways. So to use that example, if we're lacking intimacy or care or insecure because we haven't experienced authentic intimacy. And when I say intimacy, people are probably thinking, well, is he talking about sexuality? I'm not talking about sexuality, though that would be one form of intimacy, and I think in its proper context is acceptable and should be embraced. But intimacy in the sense of like sitting at a table, having dinner with your family, having dinner with friends, raising a toast with loved ones or people you're just getting to know, working together in fairness and with dignity and giving dignity to one another. So I have learned in my, I guess it's been 20 years or so of vocational ministry that in fact most every sickness or most every reaction that we watch or observe has come, for me, I've experienced it or observed it, has come from love deficits. Now that's a simple way to say, like, just people that just don't feel loved.
That makes sense. If I'm lacking something, I'm going to look for something to fill it. So if, to use your term, love deficit, I would say that insecurity, whatever, I've never felt the love of family around me, so I'm filling that void in my life. This morning's devotional that I use, Brian gave me a little book, and then I use Upper Room. They talk about Job, one of my favorite people in the Old Testament. He just, I don't know, could I have done what Job, and Job lost everything. He never lost his faith. I think about my own family. My mom and dad and grandparents lived through the Depression. My dad used to say, "You've never been hungry." And he was. He grew up on a farm, plowed with a mule. They had very little food. I mean, and Daddy used to just fuss about us of wasting so much. Why did those people give up? They had faith. World War II, World War I, war between the states.
And they had each other.
Our people knew, we're in the hands of God. I don't understand why this is happening, but I know He's with me and He's going to help me. See, that's what I don't see in our society now. 9/11. What happened when 9/11 happened? The last time I was in class, that 9/11, I mentioned 9/11, and my kids looked at me and said, like, what was that?
Oh, Lord.
I didn't realize that some of them weren't even born then.
That's amazing.
But in 9/11, you had a peak, people going to church. They turned to God. What's it going to take? I don't know. Of course, God, got discouraged and kind of ticked off with humans and flooded the place.
That's true.
Just start over. I don't know whether He's going to do that or not. But the lack of faith, and let's face it, faith in family is hard when you don't have any money, you don't know what you're going to do, your children are acting like, excuse me, hellions. What do you hang on to? How do you learn? That's what, and I think a lot of my faith came from mentors. What can we do as a church? We can be mentors. We can be examples. We can be real people, not put-ons. And I look at my life and the people that meant so much to me were real. They lived through hard times and they made it. So as a church, I think we need to address that. We need to quit saying, gee, I wish we had more people. Well, why not deal with what we've got and do the best job we can and hope we can bring in more? And that's it. Are we giving our families what they need? Are we giving these young people? Here I am, soon to be 73. I think my generation perhaps is one of the last generations that came from a traditional family, mom, dad, and whatever. Are we providing what they need? Are we giving 20 and 30-year-old adults what they need to raise children? And let's face it, that's one of the hardest jobs you'll ever have.
What do they need? Because, and that's a rhetorical question, but I say that as a pastor who deals with conflict resolution quite often, and I think about cell phones.
Oh, yeah.
People come into church, people come into communities, they come into the storefront, they come into Walmart, they come into Ingles, or wherever they may, or the pizza
With
joint,
their phone in their hand.
and their phones in their hand, and the implied is, I'm in this bubble, and I am not interested in engaging others. You talk about the table, coming to the table. By the way, we're sitting at a table, but also Christianity at its core is a table faith. When we sit down, the one thing we do is come to the table and take communion. And that's what we model, and that's what Jesus modeled to us, right? Was to come to the table, and Judas was at that table at the Last Supper, and John and Peter, and they were all, and the sons of thunder, and they were all a bunch of miscreants, and they all sat at the same table, and Jesus sat with them.
We have some comments. A lot of times parents aren't home, TV raises their children, and a lot of families think you can buy love.
Amen.
Well, people are certainly looking for love. And they're looking not just for love, but I think for meaning. And I think these trends we're talking about are, they're creating the vacuums for meaning, but they're also technology and these angers and this that creates this tribalism, and I'm right and you're wrong, you're my enemy, and I'm for love and I'm against these other people, they're my enemies. I mean, I think that's something that's filling the void, and I think it's a false idol. It's false righteousness. We're good and they're evil. But I think people are looking for good. They're looking for love. They're looking for good. They're missing faith. And they're eating up, and we're eating up, and we do it too. We eat up this stuff that is programmed, and we participate in our own programming to make us angry. And so, how do we engage?
One thing that I've learned is that I think a lot of people want instant gratification. And because of technology, it's made it so easy to find, what do you want to order food? You can have it delivered to your door immediately.
No waiting.
Do you want to find some information? Google. You want to talk to somebody? Call them. And it's not like a landline where you got to let it ring. No, you can physically see the person on your phone.
You text them and you want the answer right back.
Exactly. You want sex. Sex is everywhere on the internet.
Right.
And it is definitely, like, people want instant gratification. They want an answer right now. And they've gotten used to it over the years that it's just getting faster and faster. Now, when it comes to religion, we need to have patience, especially when we're talking with God. Because he doesn't answer us on our time. He answers us on his time, when he is able to answer us, when it's the right time for us to receive his answer.
Right.
Because we think we know more than he does. So I've spent my life telling God what he should do for me.
Right. It comes down to Jesus take the wheel.
Hey, but
That's
you know
right.
what? It's easy to say that, and we all know it in front of our brains. But when we want a hit of dopamine, we don't want to wait on Jesus.
We want him now.
That's right.
Right there.
Absolutely.
And so we look for that candy or that Dorito or that whatever proverbially it is, whether it's the internet porn or God forbid, but these things or the lady across the street that's not my wife, or you insert whatever instant gratification, the lady in the car at the red light, whatever it is that is it would offend us in our front brain, but in that whatever that lizard brain, if you will, we become animals, and that's and religion, or specifically Christianity, asks us to dwell in that in the place we're in, not in sort of the instinctive sort of, like, it tells us to step away from those banal sort of I gotta have it, and to stop and see the community and the need and the greater good of the community.
You talk about the table and family structure. It's amazing to me how many have, in the last, 30 years of teaching school, maybe 20, how many families do not sit down for a meal. And see, when we had children, you sat down at a table for a meal. Breakfast, supper, sorry, that's at night, dinner's in the middle of the day. Town people call it lunch. We call it dinner.
I called it dinner.
See, a country
So the dinners at night 6 days a week, but Sunday dinner is after church.
But anyway,
And supper is what you eat.
you
when
sat
you're too
down
sick
at
to
a
eat
table,
fried chicken.
and when we were eating, sometimes they were not pleasant. Yes, I ate many a meal with, we call it the butter paddle, the paddle that my discipline was in my lap. And we had some really heated meals. But that's when your children learn who you are and you pass your values on to them. For example, last Sunday Saturday for New Year's, we had everybody plus a set of in-laws. I think we ate dinner at 12:30. It was 2:30 before we got up from the table. After you finish the meal, you sit there, and as my mother would say, we swap lies. You tell tales, and you learn about people, and you see their insight. That's what the church is trying to do now, I think. We're trying to pass this on to the next generation. They've got to pick the torch up, because if they don't, we're going to end up with a lot of empty buildings. And I can't imagine having to face life and everything you have to deal with without the faith in God, that He's going to take care of me. Doesn't mean it's going to be easy. Doesn't mean you're not going to have to work. Doesn't mean you're not going to cry at times. But you know He's there.
Right.
And I asked myself, where did I get that from?
Right.
How do I know God lives in the left-hand corner of First Methodist? I mean, He's right there. I saw Him Sunday. I mean, He's right there.
Preacher said that's a thin spot.
Yeah, preacher's just off to the periphery. It's out there. But where did I get that? It's from being around my family that went through times I can't imagine. As a 70-year-old man, yeah, we're not wealthy, never will be. My daddy said we always wanted something we didn't have a bit of business having. But we never doubted where we could get the next, we could meet our obligations, but not having that faith in God would be so dismal.
Right.
I mean, no wonder they turn to drugs and sex and everything
So how do
else.
we bring the Christian message into the void? How do we compete with these other messages that are obviously getting out
You
there?
state your case and stand on your grounds and just do the best you can.
And how do we speak? And a lot of it's uncomfortable to say. How do we do it in a loving way?
It's called tough love, in my opinion. My parents, I know we'll forget, when the education movement became to your self-image and you didn't do this. And I asked my mother, I said, where was you concerned about my self-image? She said, I didn't care about your self-image. I knew what was best for you. At least I was doing that. So I think we've gone a little bit too far the other way. Tough love, I never doubted my folks loved me, but they didn't give me what I wanted.
I don't have the answer for your question exactly, but I try to be a student of history, and as a pastor, I've tried to, in spare moments, sort of research or think about these questions from a Christian perspective. And the good news is that the good news is that these sort of moments have happened in the last 2,000 years in societies. And there's two thoughts that come to mind, and we often don't bring them forward, but they're so critical. Two in particular are critical. One would be this, and the Methodist Church. John Wesley founded. He and Charles and a couple other guys sort of created the Methodist movement, especially once the Revolution had taken place in America. And they said, you guys have got to start a Methodist church there, because the king is not going to keep sending priests your way. So you guys have got to figure this out for yourselves. And then he sent Thomas Coke and Francis Asbury. Well, he looked very much to Augustine, who was a Western Christian. I guess we would call him Roman Catholic, but this was before the Protestant movement, so it was the church. Well, Augustine was from North Africa, and he was a Manichaeism, and Manichaeism or Manichaeanism is, you can Google this and it's on Wikipedia. Essentially, it was a sort of diversion or I guess a perversion of Christianity, in a sense that it believed in multiple gods, and it did think that the body was holy, and specifically it leaned into hedonism. So sexuality brought you closer to God. This was kind of a bridging, or a sort of a mashup, if you will, between what they assumed Christianity was about, and Jesus was a part of the holiness of God, and this Roman understanding of the gods. Well, I tell you all this to say Manichaeism fell apart, and Augustine found himself in the fallout of Manichaeism. He was an academic in this thing called Manichaeism. He was a professor. He was known across the Mediterranean for having sort of a academic prowess, the ability to debate and have conversations, and well read. Well, when it all came falling down, this idea of Manichaeism, he had a crisis of faith. And so the famous line is that he went to a garden and he heard two kids out playing across the the Garden Wall, wherever he was, somewhere in Italy. And I mean, he was in a specific place. I don't remember exactly where, but he was there, and he heard, as he was praying to God, asking him, where do I go from here? What my understanding of reality is falling apart, and this hedonism has taken me to the worst place ever. And he heard the two kids say tale lega, which is Latin for read it. And he opened the Bible and began to read the New Testament of the Bible, and he became one of the preeminent, and to this day is one of the preeminent scholars of Christianity. I mean, Christians read Augustine, and so much so that he influenced Western Christianity and Eastern to some degree. And there was a revival, and the revival of the church came forward. This was around, I can't remember exactly, but it was somewhere around 1100 AD. Fast forward to the 1700s, 1730s. John Wesley and all those other past Anglican priests were in England, where the working class, this sound familiar, were in a very hard, difficult place, and populations had grown, and the colliers, coal miners, they were out in southwest England, in the coal mines, and their kids were starving, and they were drinking, in London as well, they were drinking gut rot gin, and prostitution was rampant because it was really the only way some of these women were able to survive, and their kids were able to survive. And he walks in as a proper English priest, and completely against taking communion outside the walls of the church, but is convinced in that moment, in those times of desperation, to come out with George Whitefield, who, as many say, is the beginner of the Baptist movement across the world. But so he goes out with George Whitefield out to Cornwall, which is southwest England, to these coal miners and their pathetic existence. They're just unbelievably destitute reality. And they begin to preach to them in the fields, and offer them communion outside the church in someone else's English parish. Right, there was a priest that was assigned to that parish, so he starts breaking all the rules. And the bottom line is, revival blows up, like in a good way, across England. And looking back, say 20 years, they begin to see the Methodist and the Wesleyan, the Methodist revival that comes out of Oxford, out of this group of sort of Dead Poet Society type readers of Christian content. They read all of the Christian content together in their small little club, their holy clubs, what they call themselves, and they were the Methodists. They help spark a revival of the working class that were destitute. And meanwhile, if looking back, say the theologians and the sociologists look back 20 years, Wesley's still alive, and they are aware keenly that there was no violent revolution in England. Meanwhile, across the channel in France, where they did not have a similar revival, it became a revolution. And not only a revolution, but the first round was guillotine, and then the second round there was more guillotine, and the guillotine never stopped bleeding, right? Because, well, you're guilty, and paranoia strikes hard. To those who are killing people. they kill you, and then you get killed. This is how revolutions happen, right? Bloody revolutions, like the first wave of people get killed, and then like in Soviet Union, they killed Lenin, or they killed the Trotskyites. Then Stalin killed all the Leninites, and it's like there's always a second wave of blood. But the bottom line is, Christianity has seen destitute moments, and I think our family structures. This is my opinion, Duncan and Brandon and Joe, is that we are seeing a moral decay, and I would say Putnam County is part of a larger issue in rural, not even just rural America, but just America, maybe across the Western hemisphere, or really the whole world. But I think the church has to have a vital role in proclaiming Jesus first, and then helping to create intimacy. Well, now, we haven't done that very well. I mean, we're sitting on a podcast, if I'm really honest, and I'd love to sit with everybody who watches this. And we say there's anywhere from 100 to 200 or 300 every week. But we're not getting intimacy in this thing, but we realize this is a first step. This is a first step.
Yep, absolutely.
But intimacy, the love deficit is not going to be filled by watching this podcast.
It's called building bridges and bonds between people.
Right.
in counseling, that's the first thing you're taught is you try to build bridges. I think a good teacher does that with their classroom.
Right.
It's a rapport between the two. And Gone with the Wind, one of
It's
my
a great reference. I don't even know what you're going to say, but it's always good.
Gone with the Wind, they're talking about how Scarlett's world changed, and in it she's questioning, why did my mother teach me how to raise cotton and run a farm and run a plantation? It's because her mother thought her world would be just like hers. I think we're in the same. My parents never envisioned the world I'm living in.
Yeah, but Scarlett adapted.
She adapted, and that's what we've got to do. Our church, the church I grew up in, is not the church today. I can't imagine when I was 15, 12, that the church dealt with what we deal with every day here. I mean, and some of the change has been good. We're learning to accept people for what they are, not for what we think they should be, and that's good. But some of the changes have not been good. We've lost a lot of that. You said moral decay. I think moral fiber. You know, who shapes you into what you are? Who makes you what you are?
This town, 2.5 years doesn't make me an expert on Eatonton or Putnam County, but this town does deal with a lot of those isolations. You've got black and white sort of. There is an engagement. To the credit of this town, there are engagements, but there are also sort of understood separation.
You used the word silos at one time.
It's
That's
siloed,
right.
absolutely
right.
There's siloed. Then you've got 40 years ago you had the Sinclair folks move in, and then about 30 years ago you had the Oconee folks move in, and now you've got four, maybe five distinct silos in this town. Add to that we were at least engaging on economic conversations when we had Plant Branch, which brought in I think 15% of tax revenue. I mean, people didn't pay property taxes. These were the good old days. Yeah, think about that, Brandon. Then it closed down during the Obama administration because just the coal-fired plants were no longer really in this. And we can go into details on that, but the truth is silt ponds were going to have to be dealt with, and it was going to cost a lot of money. Well, that's another story. So then we lose Horton Homes, which was a huge, I think they employed something like 3,500 or thereabouts employees. I may be wrong. Don't quote me on that.
I have no idea.
A lot. A lot of the working men in our county.
And these were like $30,000 to $50,000 jobs, right? And you were incentivized to show up. If you didn't take vacation, you got incentivized. These people worked hard in this town. This was a very strong working class town. Before that, there was an aluminum plant,
There's Interfer over where we live, which is the wood plant.
And see, you also realize we've lost the dairy industry.
We lost the dairy industry in this town. Before that, of course, the cotton industry. That
And
was
see, the
civil
dairymen, the farmers, the ones that paid the bulk of the property tax. And now you don't have that. At one time, there were over 200 dairies, and now I think they're
Right.
6 to 8. I don't know the exact number, but
And so the
almost none.
economics, and this is important because our Christianity tells us we need to all come to the table. But there's a hierarchical understanding in our capitalistic system, right? And there's reasons why we don't have that Horton Homes didn't have major competitors in this town. And that's I can say that because I'm an outsider. And who the heck does he think he is? But if I was from here, I might not say that. But there was some wage competition going on, and when you're the only employer by and large, I mean Georgia Power was employing a few people too, but when you're the major employer and you don't have to compete for wages, that changes how economic development happens. Well, Horton goes down because mortgages won't because nobody will lend on a depreciating double wide home or modular home, however you want to call it. So when modular homes could no longer be loaned on, when the banks stopped loaning, people couldn't buy them. Well, that just imploded the market. So that imploded basically that Horton Homes economic structure in this community. That said, this town has seen, like you said, iterations where markets have come and gone, whether it was World War II and the aluminum plant, or the dairy got consolidated, or the boll weevil took the cotton out. But here we are in a moment when this town, I think, and I'm an outsider, and I'll be here for a few years, and then I'll be on the way, and another Methodist pastor will come in my place. But this town does need to come to the table somehow across those 5 different silos and see the need to love one another and really have the courage to try to work together for the greater good. And this creates family issues. This trickles down to mom and dad don't live together. Dad drinks, or dad has left town, or he's never home. These are the things that bring moral degradation or societal degradation, familial degradation.
We do have another comment. Show God's grace and plant seeds that they can use in everyday life.
That's right. Being mentor. That's right. I like planting the seeds.
But we got to be relevant so that they'll, when the seed grows, that people will come and eat the fruit.
You can't talk about, you must have faith and be strong. You have to deal with the kid who's being picked on, bullied. I'm not popular. I want a new car.
Right.
Why aren't you giving me a new car? If you love me, you'd give me this. And why do I have rules? Why can't I stay out all night? I need $40. And when they're influenced by other parents whose idea of parenting is throw them some money, get them out of my hair, let them entertain themselves, while I go in. I think we have created a generation of parents who think they're still adolescents.
So
They act like they're, because this kind of happened to me, they act like they're friends with their children. They're not
Thank you. You
supposed to
took
be
the words.
friends.
Yeah.
They're supposed to be parents. Like myself and Pastor have talked about my relationship with my parents and the lack thereof. But I worked for my own truck, my first truck, and it was a piece of junk. But I was so proud of that truck because I bought it with my money that I worked for. And this is the first time I'm retired now because of medical retirement from the Navy, but this is the first time in my life that I don't have a job or two jobs. I was a volunteer fireman and I was working for Walmart at the same time. I would get calls and I would go, I'd tell my department manager, like, hey, I'm on call. I know I'm working here. I'll make it up some other way. So what can I do?
So I brought kind of like 10,000 foot level issues. And as a church, I think we sit on both sides of that spectrum. We're looking at 10,000 feet because we were talking about like economic development for the church and what do we do with funds and what 5-year plan, 10-year plan. But so we're at the 10,000 foot level, I think, with the community. But we're also on the ground level, trying to help those that are interested to really walk together, come to the table. Teach their children what the value. We're Protestant. The value of a dollar. Protestants are supposed to work. I know Catholics work too, but Protestants we're taught to be working class. Work hard and earn your keep.
How have we lost the work ethic? And I think we have either lost it or are losing it.
We lost it because the government keeps saying, here's a $1,000 stimulus check. Here's a $2,000 stimulus check. Here's incentives to not work.
Yeah, why should I work when I can make more money with the incentives and the unemployment? Why go to work?
The good news is,
Bring it, Duncan.
that's a house of cards. So most people would think that's bad news, and there's a lot bad to it, but that's obviously not sustainable.
No.
You can't continue to pay people not to work and then collect the tax revenue on the not work and then to pay it runs out.
It's how our economy crashes.
Nobody working. So we do, humans, we just always do what's necessary, and that's it. And I think I think that's one thing as we engage, we need to be honest about human nature and protective of our souls in that way because that's because how we're responding to these to the challenges that we face does affect each of us individually, but as a church we need to figure out how to go and engage on these issues and how to serve our neighbors
And I think as a church we need to be honest and discuss issues like this in the church. How as a church are we addressing moral decay? How are we addressing that the popular thing is instant gratification? How do we do that?
I don't know. The fine line though is you don't want to be the church. I don't want us to be the church that's pointing fingers all the time.
No.
And like, you need to do this or you.
With grace and love, we speak the truth. We speak what we're aspiring to. We don't say that we're living it because we're not.
And we don't say
we're
we're
not
perfect.
perfect.
We're not perfect.
We're not perfect.
But we do say what we're aspiring to, what we should be aspiring to, and we support each other in that endeavor, and we have grace that we hope God
See,
has for us.
What you just described is a family.
Well, what you described as a family, but the church is, as you said earlier, the iterations of family.
It
The
is.
church needs to be that bridge, and to connect the people in these silos who are all our neighbors.
Well,
The church needs to be that bridge.
we were talking about this yesterday, kind of small talking in your office about that I'll repeat myself for everybody else watching or listening. I have these moments that sort of, I have these inner monologues. I'm not crazy, I really am not, but I have inner monologues that are happening while I'm preaching or talking. I don't know if other people do this, but
Oh, yeah.
I'll have like two conversations happening in this brain, and I thank God for the brain that does that. But
It's called arguing with yourself.
Are you ADD?
I don't think so.
Schizophrenic?
I'm not schizophrenic. I'm not schizophrenic. I do not have two personalities or three. And the inner monologue happens almost every time it happens. I can hear it, or I start to really. There's sort of a timelessness of the moment in worship when I'm leading communion as the officiant, and as pastor in that moment, where I'm sitting in the congregation and listening to the conversation, when we pray the prayer of confession. Merciful God, we have failed to be an obedient church. We have not done your will. We have broken your law. We have not loved our neighbors. We have not heard the cry of the needy. Forgive us, we pray. Free us for joyful obedience. This is sort of, I think, where we lead. We lead on that. We don't lead on, we're best, I think. We're at our best when we lead with that. Like when we walk into the community and say, we have failed, forgive us. We start with forgive us. We have failed to be an obedient church. We have not done your will. We've broken your law.
Here's a quick fun fact. Did you know that not everyone has an inner monologue? There are people that cannot. The only way that they can think of something is if they say it out loud. They don't have a voice inside their head.
Sometimes I would like to shut mine up.
It's crazy.
You know the phrase, I'm of two minds on that. I've got 17 minds. I am schizophrenic.
Well, in all honesty, though, like for me, it's that moment it's a timeless moment when it's almost like time slows down, and I can see literally every, but I can see men and women and children sitting in that congregation saying those words. Most of the time, they're looking at the hymnal, but I see people that it's just this moment where we all have kind of acknowledged, at least we've spoken the acknowledgement that we are messed up, and that without this man called Jesus and the Holy Spirit, we got nothing to offer anybody.
I love the words joyful obedience. I think that's so. I think a lot of people look at the church and they see a bunch of dour, sour,
Finger pointers.
Yeah, and I'm so busy. And Duncan made a comment. I'm hating you, and you're going to hate me. It's it's like I'm going to point the finger at you, so nobody will point the finger at me. Joyful. Does church look now? And see, I think that's part of what in the movement, the contemporary movement, the new contemporary music. All it to me, it's new.
It takes fostering that to get there.
Oh yeah,
to joyful obedience. That takes things that are fostered, but instead the world is fostering something else.
Oh,
the world is fostering the thought of how evil the other people are, how we wish ill will, how we must cancel them. We must eliminate them.
Why should we be obedient? It's me.
Yeah.
But we're not listening. That's not canceling the other people that we disagree with, seeing them as our enemies and defeating them. And I heard someone say, who generally agrees with me politically, and it's not that I've never had a thought like this the other day, but that if that person this politician were to die in a car crash, I wouldn't cry. And he go, that's but fortunately I'm in a place where I don't want to foster that in my heart anymore. I have been in a place where that That I'm ready to fight. But I think we've got. That's where we have to. That's where we have to catch it. That's where we have to catch it because that's what the world's fostering.
Yeah.
That sentiment.
Isn't that
what's
what
up there.
Peter was like? Give me the sword.
But
Peter said, "Give me that sword, and I'm going to start this revolution with you, Jesus."
I'm gonna cut his ear off,
And
and
Jesus said, "No, you're not."
yeah, that's right.
All right.
There's an old proverb, and I absolutely love it. I'd rather be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war. So me serving in the military, I realize things a little bit sooner when there's like stuff on the news of, oh, this commander said this, and I'm like, no, that's not right. Or this person did this, and this is happening because this attack and that, and I'm like, no, that's not what they're planning. That's not what's going on. Only because I kind of know what's going on behind the scenes more so than a civilian who's never been in the military and knows how things work in there. And it's just, yeah, I feel exactly the way Peter does. Like, give me the sword, I'll fight with you. But I still know that Jesus didn't want us to do that. He wanted us to be peaceful first.
So play that out, as a soldier. Like, play that scene out. If Jesus doesn't stop Peter and those guys and whoever's with them and the whole city, like, it happens. It's an uprising. It all goes crazy for a month or two, but they end up getting squelched because the Romans come in and just cream them all.
But
And that's all we
Jesus-
ever hear of it.
But Jesus wasn't coming to save the people from the Romans. He was coming to save the souls of sinners, prostitutes.
everyone.
Yeah, generationally.
Everyone.
Generationally.
He wasn't coming for the revolution. He was coming for your soul.
He was coming to save them
That's
from
why
themselves.
he said, he said, go the extra mile. That is obedience to the Roman, to the Roman
Yeah.
system. It is not. Jesus was not a revolutionary. If he had been, he would have been Gandhi maybe.
Right.
But instead, to give people equal rights or change, he came to serve everyone with eternal life. Everyone, not just that was living then, but that would ever live
Right.
again. So that's why, that's the message we got to take out.
But the world is always going to, whether it's a war with Russia or a war with China or a war with insert country or NATO or group, there's always gonna, the answer to that is always going to be siege. And to win on the terms of the world is going to fail every time. No. But in the victors, even to the victors go the spoils, maybe. But even there's no central value in for the winner. I mean, we as Americans understand, like we always say, like two-time World War champion.
Back to back.
We're still here in depravity.
We got to enter the fray, though. That's the thing. The message is coming out there. The cultural war. We have to enter the fray.
Yeah.
We can't sit on the
with
sidelines.
with peace and love.
That's
but
right.
we've got to do it in a strong way.
We're still allowed to defend ourselves.
With spiritual armor.
We still need to be able to defend ourselves. Yes, have spiritual armor and make sure that we are good with God. Make sure that we are spiritually where we need to be. God forbid one of us dies in a battle. But we still need to be able to protect ourselves. And like there was an old thing that was sell your cloak and buy a sword. I don't remember where it's from, but I remember somebody saying that it's from the Bible. Like even Jesus was preaching self-defense. You were allowed to defend yourself. And I think this nation right now is kind of in self-defense mode. I think that's kind of where we're at right now.
You talk about what the church can do. I think I experienced a whiff of that on Christmas Eve at 5 o'clock when I walked in the sanctuary to get my pew, my little corner there.
You did. You got it.
I got it. When I got there, you could feel it. You could feel the presence of God in that church.
Absolutely.
I mean, it was there.
And that was the fullest I've seen it in a long time.
And it just wasn't the quantity of people, it was the feeling in the room. And so
Oh,
I
I
thought
know.
later, well, that's just Christmas Eve. It's Christmas, everybody's feeling
But that
good.
was so heartening to see it so
But
full.
then Sunday, The day
That's-
after New Year's Day, I came to church thinking there may be 25 people
Yeah, I
there.
figured it'd be us.
And I walked in, and to my amazement, that village was still there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, is it going to be there every Sunday? I don't know.
Pray it will be.
That's what we need to do. That's what it's going to draw people to any church, is that feeling of
But-
belonging and being part of it. And
I must add that there's nothing we have done shy of being faithful to show up. We've done nothing to make that happen.
but see, God works through us
God
being
is-
faithful.
God is working through the faithful, the fellowship of the Holy Spirit. But I've been here for 2.5 years. I've seen. You're right. God is making some move. He's got some play he's making, and I think we talk about depravity of families. Maybe we're at a point where those coal miners were in Cornwall, or where Augustine was in North Africa, when nothing he had thought was normal, or nothing he thought would work was everything he thought would work was failing, and then had to reassess. Maybe our society, maybe our town is reassessing. Maybe.
There are 3 P's. God has preserved us. That means we're still here. God has prepared us. He has given each one of us talents and things that He wants us to use. And He's promised us, if we do we listen to Him and do what He wants us to do,
Now that's a sermon, Joe.
we'll see Him. We'll be with Christ. The 3 P's. And that's what, He's not saying, you're going to do it.
Yeah.
He's going to use what He's given us.
Yeah.
And I mean, you talked about when we do communion, I always think I can look across that church. And I was absent here for 20 years. But whenever I did communion, I could always see a lot of the older people that were gracious and kind. And I mean, Miss Grit Walker was a mentor to me. But now she was gracious and kind, but she had a backbone of steel. Mm-hmm. Those people are still there. We've got to be able to do that to the next generation.
I should say we've done this. I'm not tooting our own horn, but this church, I have, in my 2.5 years here, I have seen this particular congregation act in such generous ways to individuals, to community, to this city. Now, can we do better? Yes, we can do better.
Should we do better? Yeah.
But we know the story of this congregation, and it has nothing to do with the sign or the stature of the steeple. But the people, the people of this community, I should say, Christians I would say the Christians of this city and this county, first and foremost. But I see it manifest in this little congregation. I don't mean little like numeric, but this small part of the larger church in Putnam County. I have seen the people move in grace, and I suspect that there's more of that we're going to get to see in this church. But the love deficit thing, I see love deficits moving in the positive through this congregation in various ways. But people who come hungry, right? Like sheep hungry, they come. This place can fill. The people of this place, when they love one another, when they care for each other, do have a way of allowing God to fill it, that love deficit.
When it comes to God, right now, I'm starving. I'm new to all this. I am starving. I've had my awakening this past summer. I was baptized September 12th of last year now.
In cold water, I might add.
In a freezing
It was cold.
horse trough.
It's like 70-degree water.
Tell me about it. I have to fill the
Absolutely,
thing
it was
up.
freezing.
It was Putnam County proud.
and I loved it. And I've enrolled in Athens College of Ministry, and I'm going for my BA in Biblical Studies, and I'm doing that because I want to have a closer relationship with God. I know it's going to take me several years. I know it's not going to be easy, and I am very scared because this is the first time I've taken a major where the syllabus says I need to do a half-hour presentation and write a 7-page paper with citations, and I have my syllabus, and it's just it's crazy, and I know I'm going to be asking for help, but I know that when I come to the church,
Hey, you got a professor right here.
when I come to the
teacher right
church,
here.
The preacher says the preacher says to the guy who's
yeah, when I come to the church, I know that when I sit down and ask God, what do I do? I know that He's going to point me in the correct direction of a teacher or professors or my pastor, and I know that he is going to help me find the strength to keep on going, because this is me wanting a closer relationship with him, so that when somebody asks me, why do you believe this, I can quote, this is exactly why I believe this, because God said this, and this is his rules, his law, and I love God.
There are people who there are people who will not come to this, nice little button-up shirt guy wearing with no beard. They're not going to come to me, but they'll come to you. There are going to be people who know you just inherently, and this is where Christianity can be so beautiful, because it assimilates us so comfortable. Because you can come as you are, right? You be who you are, but you may not realize it, but as those answers or as you journey, there is an entire tribe of people or tribes of people who will come to you that would never come to me.
Well, Joe was saying earlier, like, he's still surprised. There are people that your son was talking to you after the podcast where I cursed, and your son was like,
last week.
"Wow, they're people. Like, yeah, I'm people. I'm not. I make mistakes. I sin. I sin all of the time. It's not like I'm intentionally going, oh, I need to sin. It's just I forget to ask God before I do something. It's sometimes I don't say grace before I eat food. I don't thank him. And there are times that I pray and I know it's wrong, but I don't thank God prior to me asking for things. Like I'll say, dear God, can you please help me with this, such and such, such and such. But I don't say thank you for what I do have first. And I want to be better at that. And one of the courses that I'm taking is prayer and spiritual direction. And I know it's going to be hard. That's the course that I was just talking about. But I know that it's going to help me in all of the classes, whether it be the leadership course or the course on Romans or my course on prayer and spiritual direction or my future courses on the New Testament, the Old Testament, and every course on the different sections of the Bible. I know that they're all going to help me understand how to be a better Christian and a better man.
See, Brendan, you're at your journey in faith. You are hungry for it. Here I am at not the end. I hope it's not the end, but I can see the end of the road. I mean, over Christmas, we were lucky enough to have all our children. And my youngest...
Joe, just letting you know, you're our Betty White. You're going to live to 100.
You're almost 100. But I looked at my grandson, who will be 2 this year, and I thought, for somehow, God speaks to me in strange ways, and I thought, when he is 30, you won't be here. And I thought, how's he going to remember me? What type of image? So what I'm dealing with as I sit in church, listening to the minister, maybe dozing off every now and then, talking to God up in the left-hand corner, is what am I doing that is going to impact those around me and especially my family? And that, I think, is where we learn from church, that we have to pass the torch on.
One thing that I thought was cool, and it was just explained to me, I always thought that like it was bad to fall asleep in church, and obviously you shouldn't fall asleep in church. It was bad. It was bad to fall asleep in the middle of praying or reading the Bible, but somebody and I watch TikTok, and I watch a lot of religious TikTok just to get away from the news and all the horror and tragedy and stuff. But there was a woman who said, God is your father. When you fall asleep praying or in church or just because you're tired, and you can't help it if you're tired or bored, you just can't help it. She said, remember how a child falls asleep in your arm when you're in the middle of telling them a story. It's the same thing.
It's a peace.
It is. God is still.
I'm still
going to
take exception to people who fall asleep. I need to be a little bit better orator.
There are some people.
There was a joke he teed up there, which I left on the tee. I will just say that. I left it there. I thought about swearing, but I did.
I'm telling you, in our world today, everybody is so busy, and oftentimes in church, kids at school would say, "Why do you go to church?" In our life, when we were raising 3 to 5 children, and all of that, there was 1 hour a week. Number one, nobody called my name. Nobody.
That's a good point.
And it gave me an hour of peace and where you could meditate, where you could talk to God. And it was a sense of peace. So sometimes, yeah, I nod off.
Yeah.
But I think it's more of a, not that I don't want to hear, but it's a phew. Now, that was when we had, and it's still that way. So I agree with you.
Two of the assignments that I have that I'm kind of nervous about. One of the assignments is I have to pray for an hour with 3 different individuals. The other one is I have to spend, it says a half day in prayer, but it's 4 hours. And I have to journal both of these and make presentations on both of these, on all 3 people that I spoke with, all 3 people that I prayed with, how I felt, what I was going through, what I prayed on. And then I also have to make a 4 to 7 page interactive paper and a 10-minute presentation on my 4-hour prayer session. Yeah, crazy.
All I know is
I'm
like, it's
nervous
a good
about
time
this.
to take up gardening, you know?
One of the things he said is
Manual labor.
on the syllabus, it doesn't say like you need to sit on your knees and in quiet in your room by yourself for 4 hours.
There you go.
You can go on a prayer walk. You can garden. Just spend that time
Build a
specifically.
fence.
Like don't just
Dig post holes.
That's right.
don't just dig a post hole and think about digging the post hole. Think about digging the post hole with God.
High velocity projectiles.
Splitting
I can
wood.
go to the range and have
Yeah.
some fun
Go
with
to the gun
some
range.
high velocity projectiles
Fishing.
from my high
Don't you have an appointment at 11?
hunting. I like hunting.
Oh.
But I can go to the range and shoot some high velocity projectiles from my high velocity projectile shooter.
Yeah.
High velocity.
So we started with family. I think the family is we're in a moment when the family has been easing towards a crisis.
And,
in our
and we
culture.
started, at least I'll speak for me, I started this discussion with a feeling of despair, despairing the trends, and we're ending it on, I think that there's opportunity because there's hunger there, and God is giving us some answers about the direction He wants us to go.
I agree with you there.
In light of the challenges that we're facing, and as Joe said, the question has always been, what are we supposed to do?
Yeah, you talk about revolution and how the country's on sort of the edge. I dare say that if we didn't have the church, I'll help us in this sort of profound way. The church historians and sociologists would say that the one Christian of all the Christians in our country, in our 235 year or something like that history, the one who had the most profound impact and was able to capture the media's attention and steer the media was Martin Luther King Jr.
Absolutely.
Because he brought actually he read he went to Boston University, a United Methodist seminary. He in his doctoral work worked with E. Stanley Jones, who's a good Methodist missionary to India, an American missionary to India, and of course worked through the readings of Gandhi, which were also influenced by E. Stanley Jones, a good Christian and good Methodist. That said, he, like no one else, was able to steer us away from violence,
That's right.
away from civil war or potential for civil war across ethnicities and socioeconomic lines. And I would say that there are people or groups of people who have tried and continue to try to this day to spark that civil unrest. And yet it hasn't happened. I will take a big step, I'll make a big statement and say, I think the church in America is the one reason, I mean Jesus really, but the teachings of Jesus through the people who actually are still following Jesus is the one reason we have not found ourselves in a breakdown scenario.
I think we are on the verge of revival or revolution.
And so the question of are we going to be like John Wesley and the English?
I'm hoping
Or are we gonna be
that
like
we
the
are
French?
like.
Are we going to be like just let them eat cake and the French?
I really do hope. I don't want war. I know what war happens. I know what happens in war. People die. Good people die.
And children see it happen.
And people should not see that. War is terrible. I don't promote war. I don't like war. I don't want it to happen.
Of course not.
I've lost many friends.
Of course not.
I've lost many close friends. I would much rather us have revival than revolution.
So let's pray that this moral degradation that we are all experiencing and living into and seeing, in some ways we're living into it, that we've seen the edge of the cliff and that God will bring us off that edge.
And I think the way we're going to do that is by standing our ground and being what we are.
And being healed, being restored. You talk about your own life. My life is a story of restoration and transformation. You see me with a button-down shirt and you think, well, he's just a preacher. But I can promise you that the directions of my life have been, God has taken me away from other directions. And I'm not saying I'm perfect, but I've come off the cliff, so to speak, in my life.
Whenever I graduate from Athens College of Ministry, and if I ever become a pastor and ordained or whatever the case may be, I'm going to be a very interesting pastor because I know that I curse. I'm never shaving my beard, and I am covered in Navy tattoos. And
do you know this? There's an entire population of people who need Jesus that will hear you and relate
because
to you.
I look like a normal person.
Exactly.
As my
It's
son
no
said,
offense to you.
As my son said,
I'm
you
not
pastor.
abnormal in Athens, Georgia. I was
look
pretty
like a
normal.
pastor. Like you.
I look like a professor in
you look
Georgia.
like you look like a
or
professional.
thereabout, or a banker.
You look like a professional, and there's
Jesus.
nothing wrong with that because
Right.
there is an entire generation and group of people that will
Right.
listen to you. I enjoy listening to you.
Right.
I love when we sit and have our conversations. I absolutely love it, and I trust you and I listen to you. But I want to be able to spread the word to the normal person, and the normal person who the normal person.
He's saying I'm abnormal. That's okay.
You know what I'm trying to say.
I'm
We
okay with
know
that.
what you're trying to say.
Words are hard.
I went to Georgia Tech, but most people would say that's weird. So
You're weird. So you're a Georgia fan. You're an Atlanta fan. Yeah, okay. Anyhow, but I'm covered in tattoos.
There's a market for that.
I have a beard. Like
You're John the
these are
Baptist.
things that just make me. I curse. These are things that make me.
That's right.
What I feel can be more approachable. Like there are people that are terrified to approach you because you're
Of course.
the pastor.
I walk into gas
I
stations
call
and
you-
people look at me strangely.
I call
sometimes.
you my friend. I still call you pastor over David because I'm not comfortable with that yet. But I still consider you're my friend.
Sure.
You are my friend.
Thank
and
you.
when you leave this church, if you leave this church, I know that I'm going to be upset. And it's going to be mainly because you're my first pastor.
Right.
But you are my friend.
Yeah. Just
And
remember, the next pastor will have gifts and graces that I don't. Right. So you just have to be okay with that.
Absolutely. And I probably will.
We're really looking forward to it. I'm sorry, I did that. I'm sorry.
On that note, let's close this up.
Too soon? Okay.
All right, thank you guys for watching. Sorry about that closing moment, but you know what? Every one of us at this table have different abilities, and so do you. So be you, and just all of us be ourselves, and try to bring Jesus to wherever we find ourselves. Have a good day. God bless.